Say the name of this country out loud, and most people see the same picture. Glass towers standing in a heat haze, white robes moving through an airport terminal, a skyline that looks like it was ordered from a catalogue and delivered overnight. Money, in other words. Money without texture, without weather, without a Tuesday morning. And the picture is not wrong exactly. Beneath the shallow water off the northeast coast, in a gas field roughly the size of a small country, sits something close to 900 trillion cubic feet of recoverable natural gas. It is the largest field of its kind on Earth. It holds somewhere near an eighth of every proven cubic foot of natural gas on the planet. One nation of fewer than 3 million people sits on top of it, and that nation now supplies close to a third of the world's liquefied natural gas. The wealth this produced is real. By the measures economists use, no country on Earth converts a smaller population into a larger per capita fortune. But here is the thing the picture leaves out. Fewer than 1 in 8 people living in this country are citizens of it. The overwhelming majority of the people who wake here, work here, cook here, ride the bus here, and go to sleep here do not hold a Qatari passport. They came from Kerala and Kathmandu, from Manila and Dhaka, from Cairo and Colombo. They came for a contract with an end date. They are, by the country's own legal language, guests. Which means that when you ask what a day in the richest country on Earth actually looks like, you are mostly asking about the day of someone who does not share in the wealth that made it famous. So the question is not how this country got rich. That story takes 20 minutes and a chart. The question is stranger and much harder to answer from outside. Who actually lives the day here, and what is really running it? The gas was found in 1971. That is worth sitting with for a moment because it is barely half a century ago. A Qatari grandmother alive today was born into a country with no reliable electricity in most of its houses, where the family income came out of the sea and where the summer was survived rather than air-conditioned. The field was not immediately understood as a fortune. It took decades of borrowing, engineering, and negotiation before the gas could be chilled into liquid at -162 degrees and loaded onto ships. Only in the first decade of this century did gas overtake oil as the largest share of national revenue. The transformation everyone photographs, the towers, the reclaimed islands, the stadiums, happened inside a single human lifetime. And this is where most documentaries about this place stop. They stand at the edge of the gas processing city at Ras Laffan. They quote the export figures, they cut to a helicopter shot of the skyline, and they call that the story. But a gas field does not tell you when people eat. It does not tell you which hand you take a coffee cup with, or why the cup is only filled a third of the way, or what happens if you refuse the second pour. It does not explain why an entire city goes quiet at 11 in the morning and comes back to life after dark. It does not explain why the same small glass of milky tea costs 1 riyal on a roadside counter and is drunk by a construction laborer and a company director within an hour of each other. The money changed what this country owns. It changed the skyline, the passport, the hospitals, the roads. It changed the daily habits far less than you would expect. What actually organizes a day here is much older than the field and much stranger than the wealth. It is a set of customs that came out of the desert and out of the sea, built by people who had almost nothing, in a place that could kill you between one settlement and the next. Those customs solved specific problems: thirst, distance, scarcity, trust between strangers, the need to know who could be relied on. The gas did not delete those solutions. In some cases, it quietly preserved them. So, we are going to spend our time somewhere other than the field. We are going to spend it at a roadside tea counter at 4 in the morning, in a sitting room where the coffee is poured in a specific order, on a bus carrying men in blue overalls out to the industrial edge of the city, at a Friday table where the rice is eaten by hand from a single tray, and on a stretch of waterfront at dusk where, for about 2 hours a day, the entire population of this country stands in the same place. Because the richest country on earth is not, mostly, a story about being rich. It is a story about being a guest, and about a people who built an entire civilization around how you treat one. The day begins earlier here than almost anywhere else in the developed world, and it begins in the dark. Somewhere around 3:40 in the morning, in a low block of buildings on the industrial rim of Doha, a light comes on in a room shared by 6 men. There is no window worth the name. There is a ceiling fan, a stack of plastic drawers, and 6 beds arranged so that each man's head is roughly a meter from the next man's feet. He does not use an alarm. The man in the bed nearest the door wakes first every day and wakes the others, because that is the arrangement they came to in the first week and never discussed again. By 4, the buses are running. They are called Tata buses, after the Indian manufacturer whose name is stamped on most of them, and at that hour they move through the outskirts of the city in long, unlit convoys. Inside, the men are mostly silent. Some sleep sitting upright, with the practiced precision of people who have learned to bank rest in 15-minute deposits. The overalls are blue, a specific institutional blue that you begin to notice everywhere once you know to look for it. At petrol stations, on scaffolding, in the back of pickup trucks, at the edge of a roundabout. They are heading out before dawn for a reason that has nothing to do with productivity and everything to do with physics. By 10 in the morning in July, this country becomes genuinely dangerous to stand in. Summer temperatures here routinely pass 40 degrees Celsius and regularly touch the high 40s. The humidity coming off the Gulf makes it worse, not better. Sweat stops evaporating, and the body loses its main method of cooling itself. Since 2021, national law has forbidden outdoor work between 10 in the morning and 3:30 in the afternoon, from the 1st of June to the middle of September. Before that rule, the ban was shorter, and before that, in practice, there was no ban at all. Men died. That is not an allegation. It is a matter of published record and repeated coroner's language about cardiac events in fit men in their 20s and 30s. The reform came late, and it came because of pressure from outside. So the day is bent around the heat, and everything else bends with it. Government offices open at 6 in the morning and close at 2 in the afternoon. The school run happens in near darkness. The work week runs Sunday to Thursday, because Friday is the day of congregational prayer, and Friday morning belongs to the mosque. Shops shut in the early afternoon and reopen at 4 or 5, and the real commercial life of the city, the shopping, the eating, the visiting, the arguing over prices, takes place between 6 in the evening and 1 in the morning. It is, for a third of the year, a nocturnal country. The daylight hours are something to be got through indoors. Which brings us to the tea. Somewhere between 4 and 5 in the morning, along a service road on the edge of an industrial district, a metal shutter goes up on a counter barely 2 meters wide. Behind it, a man from Kerala sets a wide aluminium pan onto a gas ring. Into it goes black tea dust, not leaves, dust, the cheap grade that gives color fast, then water, then cardamom, sometimes saffron, then a quantity of evaporated milk and sugar that would alarm a doctor. He boils it hard. He does not steep it gently. He lets it climb the sides of the pan and then knocks the heat back. And he does this 4 or 5 times until the liquid has gone the color of wet sand. Then he pours it, from height, into a plastic cup the size of a shot glass. This is carak, and its price at that counter is 1 riyal, roughly $1/4 of a US dollar. He will pour 300 of these before noon, some mornings 400. Cars pull up on the shoulder and do not switch off their engines. Men in blue overalls stop on the way to the bus. Men in pressed white thobes stop on the way to an office in a tower with their family's name on it. A nurse coming off a night shift, a taxi driver, a school teacher, a boy sent out by his father. And the price does not change for any of them. That is worth pausing on in a country this stratified. There is no premium cup, there is no member's counter. In a place where the gap between a citizen's life and a laborer's life is measured in orders of magnitude, there is exactly one thing that everybody drinks, at the same counter, at the same price, several times a day. It is not a grand national institution. It is a plastic cup of oversweetened tea sold out of a shed. But keep it in mind. We will come back to it, and by the end, it will look less like a drink and more like the only shared table this country has. The carak itself is not Qatari, strictly speaking. It arrived with the people who make it. It is a descendant of the strong, milky chai of the Indian subcontinent, carried here in the luggage of migrants across the second half of the 20th century and adapted to Gulf tastes with cardamom and a heavier hand on the sugar, which makes it a fairly precise little portrait of the country. Something brought by guests, adopted so completely by the hosts that it now sits in the tourism brochures as a national symbol, sold back to everyone at a price that excludes no one. By 7 in the evening, the old market at the center of Doha has woken up. Souq Waqif means roughly the standing market, a name that comes from the way traders once stood with their goods on the bank of a seasonal watercourse because the ground there flooded and nobody could sit. It is centuries old as a site and about 20 years old as a building. In the early 2000s, the authorities faced a decision that most Gulf cities faced and most Gulf cities lost. The old souq was crumbling, and the cheap answer was to flatten it and build a mall. Instead, they rebuilt it. Mud render, exposed timber beams of split bamboo and mangrove pole, the same narrow lanes, the same awkward corners. Purists will tell you it is a reconstruction, and it is. It is also, on any given evening, the most genuinely used public space in the country. Walk it after dark, and the layers separate out. There is a lane that sells nothing but spices, sacks rolled down at the top to show turmeric, dried lime, cinnamon bark, cardamom pods. There is a lane of textiles, where the men measuring cloth are Afghan, and the men buying it are Sudanese. There is a whole section given over to birds and another to fish, and one narrow alley where you can still have a cooking pot re-tinned by hand. And there is a courtyard where men sit in plastic chairs facing each other, doing nothing that could be described as an activity for 2 or 3 hours at a stretch. That last one is the part outsiders find hardest to read. Nothing is being bought. Nothing is being negotiated. There is coffee, and there is a shared water pipe, and there is talk that circles the same 6 subjects. To a visitor raised on the idea that public space is for transit and commerce, it looks like idleness. It is closer to infrastructure. In a society organized around family, tribe, and reputation, sitting in public for 3 hours is how information moves. Who is looking for work? Who is looking to marry a daughter? Whose business is in trouble? Which contractor pays late? There is no institution doing that job, so the job is done by men in plastic chairs every evening at low volume. The falcons are 2 lanes away. There is a market here that sells nothing but hunting birds, and beside it, a hospital that treats nothing but hunting birds. Falcons arrive in the waiting room, hooded and perched on their owner's forearms, sitting in the same queue you would sit in. Inside, they are anesthetized for feather repair. A broken flight feather is spliced with a donor feather, a technique called imping that is at least 600 years old and is still done by hand under a microscope. A well-bred falcon here can cost more than a car, some cost more than a house, and you could file that under the wealth story, an extravagance made possible by gas money. But that reading has the arrow pointing the wrong way. Falconry in this part of the world was never a sport for the rich, it was a food strategy. Bedouin families trapped a wild falcon at the start of the cool season, trained it in weeks, hunted houbara bustard and hare with it through the winter to put meat on a diet that otherwise ran on dates, milk, and dried fish, and then released the bird back to the wild in spring rather than feed it through a summer when it could not earn its keep. The releasing is the detail that matters. It tells you the bird was a tool with a season, not a possession. That practice, take what the year offers, hold it lightly, give it back, is the same logic that governed grazing, water, and movement across this peninsula for 1,000 years. Today, the birds are bred rather than trapped, and the falconers arrive at the desert camps in 4-wheel drives with generators. The wealth changed the equipment. It did not change the season. Falconry still happens between roughly October and February, and then stops, because that is when the heat allows it. The same reason it always happened then. To understand why any of this survived, you have to go back to what this country was before the gas, and the honest answer is poor and dependent on the sea. For most of recorded history, the settlements along this coast lived on pearls, not as a luxury trade conducted at a distance, as the entire economy. In the season, which ran from June to September, the male population of a coastal town simply left. Boats went out for weeks at a time. A diver went down on a stone weight to 20 meters or more with a nose clip of turtle shell and leather caps on his fingers, held his breath for around 90 seconds, filled a basket, and was hauled up by a rope man who was often his brother. Then he did it again. 50, 60, 100 times a day. They ate on board. A single pot of rice and dried fish and whatever spices had come across from the Indian trade, cooked once and eaten by hand from a communal tray, because fuel and fresh water were the 2 things you could not waste. That pot is the direct ancestor of the dish this country now calls its own. Makboos, rice, meat, dried black lime, cardamom, cinnamon, cooked in one vessel and served on a single wide platter for everyone to eat from together. It is a pearling boat's dinner that came ashore and got richer. The pearling world ended fast. In the 1930s, Japanese cultured pearls reached the world market. A cultured pearl was cheaper, more uniform, and indistinguishable to almost any buyer. Within a few years, the price of a natural Gulf pearl collapsed. Then came the global depression, and the Indian buyers who financed the fleets stopped coming. The towns emptied. Al-Zubarah, once a walled trading port of several thousand people on the northwest coast, had already declined by then. What remained was abandoned to the sand, and it now sits under protection as an archaeological site where you can still trace the street grid, the courtyard houses, and the harbour wall. There are people alive in this country who remember the years between the pearl and the gas. They describe a hungry decade. Families that had lived by diving had no diving to do and no other trade to fall back on. Some left for Bahrain or Saudi Arabia. Those who stayed lived on what the palm groves and the fishing boats could produce. That is the gap the gas closed. Not a leap from comfortable to wealthy, a leap from genuine scarcity within one lifetime to the highest income per person on Earth, which is why the customs of scarcity are still visible everywhere. They were not ancient history to the generation that built this state. They were a recent memory. There is a room in a Qatari house that a visitor will almost certainly be shown and will almost certainly misread. It sits near the entrance, often with its own door to the street, so that a guest can enter it without passing through the rest of the home. In older houses, it was frequently the only room with windows facing outward. It is called the majlis, which means simply a place of sitting. The furniture is low. Cushions and long benches run along the walls so that everyone faces inward and nobody sits at a head position. There is an incense burner somewhere, usually oud or sandalwood, and it is not decorative. It is passed around at specific moments, and the smoke is drawn into the clothes with a cupped hand. There is a shaped brass or steel pot with a long curved spout called a dalla. There are small cups without handles called finjan. To a visitor, it reads as a parlour, somewhere to be received politely before the real business happens elsewhere. There is no elsewhere. The majlis is where the business happens. This is the room where a marriage is proposed and negotiated between two families, where a dispute between neighbours is heard and settled without a court, where a young man is told what his grandfather did and what will be expected of him, where historically a tribal leader took petitions from anyone who walked in. In 2015, the tradition was inscribed on the UNESCO list of intangible cultural heritage, jointly with 3 neighbouring states. Recognition not of a room, but of a functioning social institution. And the coffee served in it operates by a code so precise that every element of it is a rule. The coffee itself, qahwa, is barely coffee by most of the world's standards. The beans are roasted lightly, ground with a heavy weight of cardamom, sometimes saffron, sometimes cloves, and boiled rather than brewed. It comes out pale gold and thin, closer in color to weak tea, and it is unsweetened. The sweetness arrives separately in the dates that sit beside it. It is poured by the youngest man present, not by a servant, not by the host, by the youngest capable adult in the room, who stands while everyone else sits, holding the dalla in his left hand and the stack of cups in his right. He serves the most senior person first. Then he moves right to left around the room. He fills each cup roughly a third full. A visitor almost always reads this as meanness. It is the opposite. A third of a cup means the coffee is still hot when it reaches your mouth, and it means the cup will be empty soon, and it means he will come back and pour again. The small measure exists to guarantee the repetition. You are not being given a drink. You are being given a reason for him to return to you 4 or 5 times in front of everyone. And it does not stop until you stop it. There is no polite verbal formula. You take the empty cup and shake it twice, side to side, with a small movement of the wrist. That is the entire signal. Do it, and he moves on. Fail to do it, and he will keep filling the cup, because the assumption in this room is that a guest is never finished. There is one more detail, and it is the one that reveals what the room is actually for. In the old accounts of this coast, the man pouring in an important majlis was sometimes chosen because he was deaf. Think about what that implies. It implies that what was said in that room was worth protecting, that the person circulating through the conversation with a pot in his hand was a potential leak, and that the solution was to appoint someone who could not carry the words out. Marriages, debts, alliances, the settling of a killing between families, these were discussed in front of a man who poured and heard nothing. The deaf pourers are gone. The gesture survives. The third full cup, the right-to-left circuit, the shake of the finjan. And what it preserves is the memory of a room where discretion was the product. The hospitality was never only kindness, it was the physical apparatus of a society that had no written contracts, no police force, and no courts, and that therefore had to make trust visible, repeatable, and witnessed. Which explains the rule that governs everything else in this culture, and that a visitor breaks within about 10 minutes of arriving. The guest is served first. The guest is served more than the guest can finish. The host eats last and eats least, and if a guest empties a plate, the plate is refilled, because an empty plate is evidence that the household did not provide enough. From outside, this looks like theater. It was insurance. On a peninsula, where the distance between wells could kill a traveler, where the summer removed the option of moving during daylight, and where no state existed to help anyone, a stranger at your tent was a man who would die without you. The rule was that you fed him, sheltered him, and asked him no questions for 3 days. In exchange, and this is the part that matters, the same rule applied to your son when he was out on the sand and arrived at somebody else's tent. Hospitality was a mutual insurance scheme with a 100% participation rate, enforced by reputation in a place with no other mechanism for survival. That is the job the custom was doing. And it is still doing it in a country where nobody is at risk of dying of thirst between towns. Refuse an offer of food in a Qatari home, and you are not declining a snack. You are declining a contract. There is a second majlis in most houses, and outsiders rarely hear about it. The women's majlis sits deeper inside the home, away from the street door, and it is not a lesser version of the men's room. The negotiations that decide most marriages happen there first. A proposal that has not already been approved in the women's majlis will very often not survive the men's. The public institution and the private one run in parallel, and the private one frequently moves first. The greeting outside that room follows rules just as exact, and they are the rules a visitor breaks first. Between Qatari men who know each other, the greeting is not a handshake. It is a handshake and then a touch of the noses, twice, a gesture that comes from the desert and belongs to men of equal standing. It is not a kiss, and it is not affection. It is a statement about rank, delivered in public, in about 1 second. Between a man and a woman, the rule inverts. Many Qatari women will not shake a man's hand, and many Qatari men will not offer one to a woman. And the correct behavior is to wait, hand at your side, and let the other person move first. If a hand is extended, take it. If it is not, place your right hand flat over your heart and incline your head slightly. The visitor who reaches out first has not committed an offense. He has simply announced, in a room that reads these things closely, that he does not know how the room works. On Friday, the country stops. Not gradually. At around 11 in the morning, the traffic thins to almost nothing. The shopping centers are shut, the construction sites are silent, and for about 90 minutes, the loudest sound in most neighborhoods is a sermon coming through an outdoor speaker. Jummah, the congregational prayer, is the one prayer of the week that must be performed in company. Men fill the mosques and then fill the courtyards outside them, and when the courtyards fill, they pray in the car parks, in rows, on flattened cardboard and prayer mats brought from the boot of a car. The rows are dead straight and shoulder to shoulder. Nobody has a reserved position. A man who arrived in a Bentley stands in whatever row he arrived in time for, next to whoever else got there at that minute. And then everybody goes to lunch. The Friday meal is the fixed point of the Qatari week. Extended families converge on the house of the eldest, grandparents, married sons and their wives, children in numbers that make the room loud. The cooking has been underway since early morning, often by a domestic worker from the Philippines or Indonesia or Sri Lanka who has been in the household for years and who knows the family's preferences better than some of the family do. The centerpiece is makbous, rice cooked in the stock of the meat it is served with, colored gold with turmeric and saffron, cut through with the sour smoke of dried black lime, topped with fried onions and sometimes almonds and raisins. Lamb for an occasion, chicken for an ordinary week, fish on the coast. Beside it, dakus, a thin tomato sauce, and salad, and yogurt, and flat bread. It arrives on one platter, sometimes a meter across. It is set on a cloth on the floor, not a table, and everyone sits around it and eats from the section of the platter directly in front of them, with the right hand only. The technique is specific. You gather rice with the fingers, compress it against the pad of the thumb into a small ball, and place it into the mouth without your fingers touching your lips. The best pieces of meat are pulled off and pushed across the tray towards the guests and the elderly by whoever is sitting nearest them. Nobody announces this. It happens continuously, quietly, throughout the meal. A single tray means the food cannot be portioned in advance, which means nobody can be given more or less, which means the only way anyone gets a better share is if somebody chooses to give it to them. That is the mechanism. The custom does not tell people to be generous. It builds a table where generosity is the only available move, and then repeats that table every Friday for a lifetime. Afterwards, the gawa comes round again, and then the incense, and the incense is the sign that the gathering is closing. People stand within a few minutes of the burner passing. Nobody says the word for goodbye first. By 4 in the afternoon, the country is opening again, and it is opening indoors. For much of the year, the shopping center here is not primarily a place to shop. It is the town square, relocated into refrigerated air. Families arrive at 6 and stay until 11. Teenagers meet there because there is nowhere outdoor to meet. Grandparents do laps of the upper floor for exercise. There are prayer rooms on every level, and the mall empties briefly at each call to prayer. There is a mall with a canal running through it and gondolas. There is another with an indoor amusement park. There is another on a reclaimed island of Mediterranean-style apartment blocks and marina berths where the parked cars are the attraction. It is easy to be sniffy about this, But strip the marble away, and what you have is a covered market where a whole population walks slowly and looks at each other for 5 hours, which is very close to what the old souq was for, in a climate that made the old souq's opening hours the same as these. Now, what does an ordinary week actually cost here? The tea is 1 riyal. A plate of biryani at a worker's canteen in the industrial area runs about 8 to 12. A shawarma is around 6. Petrol is among the cheapest in the developed world. There is no income tax on any salary for anyone, and then there is rent, which is where the arithmetic breaks. A modest one-bedroom apartment in a decent part of the capital will take several thousand riyals a month. For a professional expatriate on a Western contract with a housing allowance, this is manageable, and the tax-free salary makes the whole equation attractive. For a Filipino nurse or an Indian accounting clerk on a mid-range package, it means sharing. For a construction laborer earning near the legal minimum, it means the employer provides the housing, and the housing is a bed in a room with 5 other beds, and the man does not choose it, see it before arriving, or have the option to leave it. Since 2021, there has been a legal minimum wage, 1,000 riyals a month in basic pay, plus mandated allowances of 300 for food and 500 for accommodation, where the employer does not supply them directly. It applies to every worker of every nationality, and when it was introduced, it was the first of its kind in the Gulf. Converted honestly, and it is roughly $500 a month in the country with the highest income per head on the planet. Most of it does not stay here. It is wired home, in cash, from a counter in a strip of exchange houses on the one day off in the week to a village where it will pay a school fee, a hospital bill, or the interest on the loan that bought the job in the first place. Which takes us out to the edge of the city, to the part of this country that appears in no promotional film. The industrial area sits southwest of the capital, past the ring roads, and it is where a very large share of this nation's population sleeps. Straight roads, low blocks, workshops, tire yards, scrap metal, and accommodation compounds built in rows. Under the law, family housing zones and single worker accommodation are kept separate, so the men who build the towers do not live within sight of them. 6 to 8 men to a room is common. 20 to 40 men sharing a kitchen is common. The kitchen is often a corridor with gas rings along one wall, fed by orange cylinders with a window at the end that does not close properly. And at 8 in the evening, that corridor is the most alive place in the compound. Because the men cook, almost none of them eat catered food if they can avoid it. And a parley crew will club together on rice and lentils and cook a communal dal. 2 Malayali men will make fish curry with the specific chili they had a cousin post from home in a sealed bag. A Bangladeshi group will produce something that takes an hour and a half and involves an argument. The pots are enormous, dented, and owned collectively without any record of who bought them. They cook tomorrow's lunch at the same time because there is no refrigeration at the site, and the food has to survive the morning in a plastic box under a scaffold. The phones are propped everywhere, on the windowsill, against a bag of onions, wedged into the grill of a fan. Every man is talking to somebody 2,500 miles away while stirring. A wife, a mother, a daughter who was 4 when he left and is now 9. The conversations are almost never about this room. They are about the school, the roof, the wedding, the field. What is being reconstructed in that corridor, at speed, out of nothing, is a household. Not a house. The room is not a house, and nobody pretends it is. A household. a group of people who eat the same food at the same time and are responsible for each other. The men are here under a system historically called kafala, in which a worker's legal presence in the country was tied to a single named employer, the sponsor. Under the older version of that system, a worker could not change jobs without written permission, and in many cases could not leave the country without it either. Passports were routinely held, though holding them was illegal. Recruitment agents in the sending country charged fees of $1,000 or more for a job that was supposed to be free to obtain, and men borrowed against land and family jewelry to pay them, and arrived already in debt to a lender at home. That is the mechanism that turned employment into something much harder to walk away from. The reporting on what followed is extensive, and it is not disputed in its broad shape. Wages withheld for months, contracts substituted on arrival for worse ones. Men working through summers before the midday ban existed. Death certificates issued in large numbers, citing cardiac arrest and natural causes, in men in their 20s with no autopsy performed, a pattern that public health researchers have repeatedly connected to heat stress. Between 2018 and 2021, under sustained international pressure, the law changed substantially. The requirement for an employer's permission to change jobs was removed. The exit permit requirement was scrapped for most workers. The minimum wage came in. The summer work ban was extended. Wage protection was routed through a monitored bank transfer system. Enforcement is the open question, and honest observers on both sides say so. Reforms on paper reach a large multinational contractor faster than they reach a subcontractor with 9 men and a pickup truck. Retaliation for complaining is documented. The men most vulnerable to all of it, domestic workers inside private homes, are the hardest to inspect and the least protected. Both of these are true at once, and any account that gives you only one of them is selling something. The country has made the most substantial labor reforms in the region, and the system those reforms were fixing did serious, measurable harm to a very large number of people, and its residue has not been cleared. So, the field and the room. Offshore to the northeast, a gas field of a size that has no real comparison. Onshore, in a corridor with orange gas cylinders, 30 men cooking dinner and talking to their children on propped-up phones. The distance between those two facts is the true subject of this country, and there is no honest way to close it with a sentence. What can be said is this: the gas paid for the towers, the hospitals, the university campuses, the stadiums, the airport, the metro. But gas does not lay a pipe, or pour a foundation, or clean a hospital ward at 4 in the morning. Somewhere between 85 and 90% of the people who did that work, and who do it now, will never hold citizenship here, regardless of how long they stay. There is no pathway for almost any of them. A man can spend 30 years in this country, raise children who have never lived anywhere else, and remain, in law, a guest with a renewable permit. And here is the thing that makes this place genuinely strange, rather than simply unequal. This is a culture whose single, deepest custom, older than the state, older than the gas, encoded in the coffee pot and the shared tray and the 3-day rule of the desert, is that the guest is served first, served more than he can finish, and never asked how long he intends to stay. That custom was built for a world of 100 people and 1 well. It was never designed for 2.5 million guests and a gas field. The society is now attempting to run the ethic of the tent at the scale of a nation-state, and the gap between how a Qatari family will treat a stranger who walks into their majlis with a generosity that visitors describe as almost overwhelming, and how the system as a whole has treated the men in the blue overalls is not hypocrisy exactly. It is a very old, very good solution, operating far outside the conditions it was designed for, and failing at the edges in ways it was never built to notice. Which is why the tea counter matters more than it should. 1 riyal. The same cup, the same pour, the same plastic glass, handed across the same 2-meter counter to a laborer at 4 in the morning and to a man from one of the founding families at 9. It is not equality. Nobody should pretend it is. The two men will drive away to lives that share almost nothing. But for the 30 seconds they are standing at that counter, this country is doing the oldest thing it knows how to do: putting something hot in the hand of whoever turns up, without asking who they are. That is the whole inheritance, reduced to its smallest possible unit, and sold at a price no one can be excluded by. There is 1 hour of the day when the separation breaks down, and it happens at the water. The Corniche runs for about 7 kilometers along the bay at the front of the capital, a curved promenade with the towers on one side and the Doha harbour on the other. During the day in summer, it is empty enough to feel abandoned. Then, the sun goes down, the surface temperature drops, and between roughly 6 in the evening and midnight, it fills with the entire population of this country in a way that no other space here manages. Nepali men play volleyball on the grass with a net strung between 2 folding chairs. Kenyan and Ethiopian runners do intervals along the sea wall. Qatari families set out a mat and a flask and sit. Indian grandfathers walk in threes. Filipino women hold a birthday party with a supermarket cake and a portable speaker. Sudanese teenagers do keepy-uppies. A Sri Lankan couple photograph each other with the skyline behind them, then swap. Somebody is selling corn. Nobody organized this. There is no program, no ticket, no entrance. It is the one place in the country where the 12% and the 88% occupy the same ground at the same time for the same reason, which is simply that the air has finally become bearable. Out in the water, the wooden dhows are moored in rows. They are real boats, still built by hand in a yard down the coast at Al Wakra, where the ribs are shaped with an adze from imported hardwood, using a method that has not changed in any fundamental way since those hulls were carrying pearl divers out to the banks. Most of them now carry tourists in loops around the bay for an hour at a time. It is easy to read that as a decline, the pearling fleet reduced to a pleasure cruise. But the boats are still being built, by men who learned from men who learned on working hulls, and the shape is the shape the Gulf demanded. Shallow draft for the reefs, high stern for the swell, a hull that could be beached and reflated with the tide. The purpose changed. The knowledge did not. And once a year, for a month, the entire clock of this country is thrown out and rebuilt. During Ramadan, nobody eats or drinks between first light and sunset, and the law extends the courtesy in the other direction, so that eating in public during daylight is not done by anyone of any faith. Offices shorten to 6 hours. The city sleeps through the afternoon. Then, the cannon fires at sunset, and the whole country eats within about 4 minutes of each other. Dates and water first, then the prayer, then the meal. Haris, a wheat and meat porridge beaten for hours until it is smooth. Tharid, bread torn into stew. lukaimat, fried dough balls in date syrup. Long tents are put up in car parks and outside mosques where anyone at all can eat for free, and the men who eat there are overwhelmingly the men from the compounds. Halfway through the month, on the 14th night, the children go out. They wear traditional dress, carry cloth bags, and move door to door through the neighborhood singing a specific song, and the households fill their bags with nuts and sweets. It is called garangao, and it happens on the night the moon is full, so that the children can see their way home. It is a small custom, and it is doing the same job as everything else here. It teaches a 5-year-old, once a year, that a stranger's door opens and something is put into your hands. Before there was gas, there was the sea. Before there were towers, there were mud brick rooms with wind towers on the roof, catching whatever breeze came off the water and dropping it into the house. The same cooling problem solved for centuries without a single watt of electricity. The people who built those rooms had almost nothing, and they built a code of conduct so robust that it survived the arrival of more money faster than almost any society in history has ever had to absorb. That is the part that should be surprising. Sudden wealth usually dissolves the customs of the poor generation that preceded it. Here, the wealth arrived in a single lifetime, and the customs held. The coffee poured a third full, the guest served first, the tray on the floor, the falcon released in the spring, the whole population standing at the water when the heat lets go. The gas field will be producing for generations. The expansion underway will roughly double the country's output before the decade is out, and the money will keep arriving, and the towers will keep going up. But it is worth remembering what the wealth actually is in the end. It is a store of ancient sunlight buried under the seabed that this country did not make and cannot replace. Whereas the thing that actually runs the day here, who is served first, which hand you use, when the cup is refilled, and when it is shaken empty, who gets the best piece of meat off the tray, the door that opens for a child with a cloth bag, that was made here, deliberately, by people with nothing, to solve the problem of how strangers can survive each other. It is the older technology of the two, and on any given evening in this country, in a corridor with orange gas cylinders, or on a mat spread out on the grass by the water while somebody pours from a flask, it is still the one being used. Thanks for watching. Until the next journey.